So changing to Ngon is as easy as just pressing D and just changing your shape over to Ngon. We see that Ngon gets its own slider, and if we click on the Ngon name or even the little arrow at the end, we see that it expands to give us additional options. For example, with Ngon, we have a behavior where you can make Ngon snap to the previous edge that you drew, which is the former behavior that drove people crazy. Now Boxcutter actually tries to orient itself to a kind of world center, which results in a more well-oriented cut. So if you do want the previous system, there's still a toggle for it, but really there's no need for it because we considered that a bit of a bug before. The other thing is that whenever you're drawing with Ngon, you are able to just draw freely, and then holding control, you're able to begin snapping to an angle. If you're wondering why my shape is a wire, that's because I need to press H and we can make it back solid. But whenever you generally are drawing with Ngon, you're able to hold control in order to snap to an angle. And sometimes holding down control in order to snap to an angle is a little bit tedious. So for that reason, this option for angle lock is there, where basically by enabling it, you can draw an Ngon without the need of having to hold control. So I found this to be important enough to be added to the Ngon slider, so users can just go in and actually toggle this behavior on the fly. The good thing about it is it actually reverses the behavior, meaning that if you were wanting to draw a free line, you could just hold control and freely draw a line. So we can draw it at any angle that we want. And the best part is no matter how oddly we drew that previous line, because we don't have previous edge snapping, we're able to still orient this to what we would consider straight Z in this particular orientation that we're drawing at this time. So just a case of why we actually have a toggle for previous edge is that reason. The other thing is that if you wanted to toggle between cyclic and non-cyclic, which basically makes your Ngon a line or a closed shape, there's an option for it here along with lasso, which we see is also part of its slider. However, just by clicking this option, we can now just draw an Ngon line, and by pressing right click to just pause after drawing that last point, we could press D and we see that there's an option for solidification. And if we want to begin extruding, all we have to do is just begin cranking the depth and we've began the extrusion process. So we can do everything from the helper whenever it comes dealing with Ngon. So it's a centralized location for pretty much dealing with everything. And hopefully as things expand in the future, we continue to add on to the helper to keep everything centralized, reducing the amount of key overhead for new users. So by clicking and applying, we can actually turn cyclic back on, which results in a closed shape. And then the next toggle we'll be talking about with Ngon is lasso. So just by clicking this, we can just quickly just change to a lasso, click and apply, and cut this through. This is a shape that I use in all sorts of scenarios of just getting free-form cuts out of organic shapes, but can definitely be a bit of an enigma. So whenever it comes to lasso, if we click on it, we see that there's an option for adaptive, which will basically calculate your dots in accordance with how zoomed in you are on the mesh. And then there's your spacing parameter, which adaptive was built to actually mitigate the need of having to adjust your spacing. So if we collapse it, we see that spacing is available, but adaptive isn't, because adaptive is aimed to be kept on at all times. Otherwise, you would get a little bit more unsatisfactory resolutions. So with that, that covers basically lasso and its slider and the options associated with it in the D helper and how it's all been centralized to make your life a little bit easier.